The scorching summer sun beat down upon Olivia Harrington as she pounded her small fists against the weathered barn door, tears streaming down her dirt-smudged face. Her heart raced as she heard the sound of approaching hoofbeats, a glimmer of hope piercing through her despair. It was the summer of 1876, and the unforgiving landscape of Wyoming Territory offered little mercy to those who called it home. Olivia had come west with dreams bigger than the endless sky above, only to find herself trapped in a nightmare she couldn't escape. "Hello? Is anybody out there?" She called, her voice cracking with desperation. "Please help me." The hoofbeats slowed to a stop and a deep voice responded. "Madam, you all right in there?" Olivia pressed her face against a crack in the wood. "They locked me in the barn," she sobbed, her words tumbling out between ragged breaths. "My uncle and his men, they're coming back at nightfall." There was a brief silence, then the sound of boots hitting the ground as the rider dismounted. "Then I'll burn the door myself," the cowboy said, his voice carrying a quiet determination that made Olivia's breath catch in her throat. Through the narrow gap in the wooden planks, she caught a glimpse of him, tall and broad-shouldered, with a face shadowed by the brim of his hat. His eyes, however, were clearly visible, piercing blue, and filled with a righteous anger that somehow comforted her. "Stand back, madam," he instructed, and Olivia hastily retreated from the door. She heard him rummaging around outside, followed by the sound of metal striking metal. Moments later, the iron hinges of the barn door began to glow red-hot as he worked to burn through them with what she assumed was a tool from his saddlebag. The air filled with the acrid smell of burning metal and wood. Olivia wrapped her arms around herself, watching as the first hinge gave way with a groan. The second followed shortly after, and then the cowboy was kicking the door open, flooding the dim barn with blinding sunlight. He stood there like an apparition, backlit by the golden rays of the afternoon sun. His face came into focus as her eyes adjusted strong jawline, days' worth of stubble, and those intense blue eyes studying her with concern. "Frederick Blackburn," he introduced himself simply, extending a calloused hand toward her. "Friends call me Fred." "Olivia Harrington," she replied, placing her trembling hand in his. His grip was firm yet gentle as he helped her step over the fallen door and into the freedom of the open air. "Thank you, Mr. Blackburn," she said, hastily wiping away tears with the back of her hand. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come along." "Best not to think on it," he replied, leading her to where his horse stood patiently. The chestnut gelding snorted softly as they approached. "We need to get moving before your uncle returns." "You don't understand," Olivia said, glancing fearfully at the path leading back to the main house. "Uncle Thomas has men all over this property. He's determined to force me to marry his business partner, a horrible man 3 times my age. When I refused, they locked me in here until I would come to my senses." Frederick's expression darkened as he scanned the horizon. "Then we'd best be quick. Can you ride?" Olivia nodded, gathering her skirts. "I grew up on horseback in Missouri before my parents died." Without another word, Frederick helped her mount, then swung up behind her. His presence at her back was solid and reassuring as he clicked his tongue, urging the horse into a gallop away from the barn. They rode hard for nearly an hour, following a creek bed that wound through the rolling hills. Olivia's heart thundered in her chest, partially from fear of pursuit, but also from the unfamiliar sensation of being pressed against this stranger who had risked himself to rescue her. As they crested a ridge, Frederick finally slowed the horse to a walk. "There's a small town about 3 miles ahead, Wilson's Creek. I've got friends there who can help us." "Us?" Olivia questioned, turning slightly to look at him. Frederick's expression was grim. Your uncle sounds like the type to hold grudges. Once he discovers who helped you escape, I'll be on his list too. Olivia felt a wave of guilt wash over her. I'm sorry to have brought this trouble to your doorstep, Mr. Blackburn. You could have simply ridden on. Fred, he corrected her. And no, madam, I couldn't have. The sincerity in his voice silenced any further protests. They continued toward Wilson's Creek as the afternoon sun began its descent toward the horizon. The town was little more than a collection of wooden buildings strung along a single dusty street. A general store, saloon, blacksmith, and a few other establishments made up the entirety of Wilson's Creek, with scattered homes spreading outward from the main thoroughfare. Frederick guided his horse to a modest two-story building with a weathered sign declaring it Wilson's boarding house. He dismounted first, then reached up to help Olivia down, his hands spanning her waist with surprising gentleness. Mrs. Wilson's a good woman, he explained as he tied his horse to the hitching post. Lost her husband in the war, runs this place on her own, doesn't ask too many questions. The boarding house was clean and simply furnished, smelling of fresh bread and lavender. The proprietress, a plump woman with kind eyes and gray-streaked hair, took one look at Olivia's disheveled appearance and immediately ushered her upstairs. You poor dear, Mrs. Wilson clucked as she drew a bath in a copper tub. Fred brought you to the right place. No one will trouble you here. Olivia sank gratefully into the warm water, allowing herself a moment of relief as she scrubbed away the grime of her imprisonment. By the time she had bathed and changed into a clean dress provided by Mrs. Wilson, the sun had set completely. She found Frederick in the small dining room downstairs, nursing a cup of coffee. He stood when she entered, and for the first time, she saw him without his hat. His hair was the color of wheat, cut short but still unruly, and without the shadow of his hat brim, his blue eyes seemed even more striking. You look better, Miss Harrington, he said, pulling out a chair for her. Please call me Olivia, she replied, settling into the seat. And thank you again for your help. Mrs. Wilson brought out plates of stew and fresh bread, then tactfully retreated to the kitchen, leaving them alone. How did you come to be riding past my uncle's property? Olivia asked after they had eaten in silence for a few minutes. Frederick's mouth quirked in a half-smile. I wasn't just passing by. I'm a U.S. Marshal, or I was. Resigned my badge 3 months ago after a disagreement with my superior. Been doing odd jobs since then. A lawman, Olivia murmured. That explains your willingness to help a stranger in distress. Some habits are hard to break, he acknowledged. But even without the badge, I couldn't ignore someone in need. He set down his spoon. Your turn. How did you end up locked in that barn? Olivia took a deep breath, steeling herself to share her story. After my parents died of fever last spring, Uncle Thomas was appointed my guardian, though I'm 20 years old and perfectly capable of managing my own affairs. He brought me here from Missouri, claiming it was for my own good, but I soon discovered his real motive. She explained how her parents had left her a sizable inheritance, which her uncle could control as long as she remained unmarried or until she turned 25. His solution was to arrange her marriage to his business partner, Harold Greeley, a man of 55 with a reputation for cruelty. When I refused, Uncle Thomas became enraged. He said I would stay locked in the barn until I agreed to the marriage. Her voice trembled. Today was the 3rd day. Frederick's face had grown increasingly stormy as she spoke. Your uncle and this Greeley fellow, they're well connected in these parts. Olivia nodded. Uncle Thomas boasts of his friendship with the county judge, and Greeley owns the largest cattle operation this side of Cheyenne. Then Wilson's Creek isn't far enough, Frederick said decisively. We'll leave at first light. I know a place where they won't find us, a homestead about 40 miles west, near the foothills. We can stay there while we figure out how to secure your inheritance." "We?" Olivia questioned again, surprised by his continued involvement. Frederick's eyes met hers directly. "Unless you'd prefer to face this alone." "No," she said quickly, a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the hearty stew. "I'm grateful for your help, Fred." Later that night, lying in the narrow bed of her rented room, Olivia found herself thinking of Frederick Blackburn. There was something about him, a steadiness, a sense of unwavering principle that made her feel safe for the first time since her parents' deaths. She fell asleep with the image of his blue eyes in her mind. They departed Wilson's Creek before dawn, Frederick having acquired a second horse, a gentle mare, for Olivia. Mrs. Wilson provided them with provisions and a heartfelt farewell, refusing payment from either of them. "You keep her safe, Fred Blackburn," the older woman admonished as they mounted up. "That girl's been through enough." They rode northwest, keeping to less traveled paths. Frederick explained that the homestead belonged to an old friend who had gone east for the summer, leaving the small cabin unoccupied. "No one will think to look for us there," he assured her. "It's well off the main trails." As they rode, Olivia found herself studying her companion when he wasn't looking. There was a quiet strength about him that she found compelling. Despite his imposing physical presence, his manner with her was unfailingly gentle and respectful. They stopped at midday beside a clear stream to rest the horses and eat some of the bread and dried meat Mrs. Wilson had packed. As they sat in the dappled shade of a cottonwood tree, Frederick asked Olivia about her life before her parents' deaths. She told him about growing up on their small farm in Missouri, learning to manage the household after her mother fell ill when Olivia was 16, and her father's devoted care for her mother until both succumbed to fever within days of each other. "They loved each other very much," she said softly, trailing her fingers through the cool water of the stream. "Even at the end, when they were both so weak, my father would reach for my mother's hand. I always hoped to find that kind of love someday." Frederick was quiet for a moment before responding. "My parents had that too, lost them both in a flood when I was 14, swept away our farm and everything we had." He skipped a stone across the water's surface. "Been mostly on my own since then." "Is that why you became a marshal?" Olivia asked. Frederick nodded. "Seemed like a way to bring some order to a chaotic world." He glanced at her with a wry smile. "Didn't quite work out that way." They continued their journey as the afternoon wore on, the terrain gradually becoming more rugged as they approached the foothills. Frederick pointed out landmarks along the way, and Olivia found herself increasingly at ease in his company. It was nearing sunset when they finally reached the homestead, a sturdy log cabin nestled in a small clearing, with a creek running nearby and a modest corral for the horses. The surrounding pines offered both shelter and seclusion. "It's beautiful," Olivia breathed as they dismounted. Frederick smiled, seeming pleased by her approval. "Let's get the horses settled, and then I'll show you inside." The cabin was simple but comfortable, with a main room containing a stone fireplace, a wooden table with chairs, and a small kitchen area. A ladder led to a loft sleeping area, and a single door opened to a small bedroom on the ground floor. "You can take the bedroom," Frederick said, setting down their supplies. "I'll bunk in the loft." As darkness fell, Frederick built a fire in the hearth while Olivia prepared a simple meal from their provisions. There was an easy domesticity to their actions, as if they had done this together countless times before, though they had known each other less than a day. They ate by firelight, discussing their plans for the coming days. Frederick believed they should remain at the cabin for at least a week, giving Olivia's uncle time to extend his search in other directions. Meanwhile, he would ride to the nearest town a day's journey to send telegrams to contacts who might help establish Olivia's legal independence from her guardian. "You've thought of everything," Olivia said, impressed by his thoroughness. Frederick shook his head. "Just experience. When you've tracked enough fugitives, you learn how to avoid being tracked yourself." "Is that what we are now, fugitives?" The word felt strange on her tongue. "In the eyes of your uncle, perhaps," he replied. "But you've committed no crime, Olivia. You're simply claiming the freedom that is rightfully yours." The way he said her name sent a flutter through her chest. In the firelight, his features seemed softer, the hard lines of determination giving way to something more vulnerable. "Why are you helping me, Fred?" she asked quietly. "The truth. It can't just be old habits from your martial days." Frederick was silent for a long moment, staring into the flames. "When I saw you through that barn door," he finally said, "something inside me just knew that I was supposed to find you, that I couldn't ride away." Their eyes met across the table, and Olivia felt a current pass between them, electric and undeniable. The moment was broken by a sound outside, a twig snapping in the darkness. Frederick was on his feet instantly, extinguishing the lamp and moving to the window. "Get down," he whispered, drawing his revolver. Olivia crouched beside the fireplace, heart hammering as Frederick peered cautiously through the curtains. Minutes passed in tense silence before he relaxed slightly. "Deer," he said, holstering his weapon. "Just a deer passing through." But the tension had broken their earlier intimacy, replacing it with a stark reminder of the danger they faced. Frederick checked the doors and windows, ensuring everything was secure before they retired for the night. In the small bedroom, Olivia lay awake for hours, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the wilderness and thinking of the man sleeping in the loft above her. Despite the circumstances, she felt safer than she had in months. Days at the homestead fell into a rhythm. They rose with the sun, tended to the horses, and spent their mornings gathering firewood or fishing in the creek. In the afternoons, Olivia explored the area around the cabin while Frederick repaired small items around the property. Evenings were passed in conversation by the fire, each gradually revealing more of themselves to the other. Frederick spoke of his years as a marshal, the good he'd tried to do, and ultimately why he'd resigned, refusing to carry out an unjust order that would have displaced a family of settlers who had valid claim to their land. "Some men wear the badge but forget what it stands for," he told her. "I couldn't be one of them." Olivia shared her dreams of establishing a school someday, having assisted the schoolmaster back home in Missouri. "Education changes everything," she explained passionately, "especially for girls who are so often denied the opportunity." On the fourth day, Frederick rode to the nearest town, Pinecrest, leaving Olivia alone at the cabin. He returned that evening with supplies, news, and a grim expression. "Your uncle's men have been through Pinecrest," he informed her as they unpacked the provisions. "They're offering a reward for information on your whereabouts and mine." Olivia's hand stilled on the package of coffee she was holding. "How much?" "Enough to tempt honest folk," Frederick replied. "But I sent the telegrams. An old colleague in Cheyenne is looking into legal options for you. And I visited the newspaper office, planted a false story about a woman matching your description heading for Montana territory." "You think they'll believe it?" Frederick shrugged. "It might buy us time." That night, a storm rolled in from the mountains, bringing howling wind and driving rain that rattled the cabin's windows. Unable to sleep, Olivia ventured into the main room to find Frederick already there, stoking the fire. "Storm wake you?" he asked, making room for her on the bench near the hearth. Olivia nodded, pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders. It reminded me of nights back home when my father would tell stories to distract me from the thunder. Frederick smiled. What kind of stories? All kinds. Adventures, mysteries, legends. She gazed into the fire. I missed the sound of another person's voice in the darkness. Without prompting, Frederick began to speak, his deep voice filling the cabin with tales of the places he'd seen, the vast prairies, towering mountains, and hidden valleys of the West. He described sunsets that painted the sky in colors no artist could capture, and stars so bright and numerous they seemed close enough to touch. As the storm raged outside, they sat side by side, the space between them gradually diminishing until Olivia's head rested lightly against his shoulder. When she finally drifted to sleep, Frederick carefully carried her back to the bedroom, his touch as gentle as if she were made of porcelain. The next morning brought clear skies and an unspoken shift in their relationship. Their glances held longer, their casual touches lingered, and a current of awareness hummed between them like a taut wire. On the 7th day at the homestead, as they were returning from checking rabbit snares Frederick had set, they heard the unmistakable sound of approaching horses. Frederick pulled Olivia behind a thicket, his hand automatically going to his revolver. 3 riders came into view on the path below them, rough-looking men wearing dust-covered clothes. One of them, Olivia recognized as Jenkins, her uncle's foreman. "That's one of Uncle Thomas's men," she whispered, her fingers digging into Frederick's arm. "The one with the red bandana." Frederick nodded, his expression grim. "They're following our trail from Pinecrest. Must have found someone willing to talk for that reward money." They remained hidden until the riders passed, heading toward the cabin. Once they were out of sight, Frederick turned to Olivia. "We need to move, now. They'll find the cabin empty and start searching the area." "Where will we go?" Olivia asked, fear evident in her voice. "There's an old mining camp about 5 miles west, abandoned years ago. We can hide there until nightfall, then circle back for the horses after dark." They moved quickly but cautiously through the woods, avoiding the main paths. Frederick led the way, his years of tracking experience allowing them to progress swiftly without leaving obvious signs of their passage. The abandoned mining camp consisted of several dilapidated wooden structures clustered at the base of a rocky slope. Frederick guided Olivia to the most intact building, a former office with most of its roof still in place. "We'll wait here," he said, securing the door behind them. "They'll search the area around the cabin first. By nightfall, they'll either make camp or head back to report." The interior of the office was dusty and filled with cobwebs, but it provided shelter and concealment. They settled behind an overturned desk, where they could watch the approach to the mining camp through a broken window. Hours passed slowly, the afternoon sun gradually sinking toward the horizon. They spoke in whispers, mindful of how sound could carry in the mountain air. As dusk approached, they heard voices and the sound of horses approaching. Frederick signaled for silence, drawing his revolver once more. Through the grimy window, they watched as 2 riders entered the mining camp, dismounting to search the buildings. Jenkins and another of her uncle's men. The third was nowhere to be seen. "They must have split up to cover more ground," Frederick whispered, his body tense beside hers. The men approached the office building, and Frederick pushed Olivia further behind the desk, positioning himself between her and the door. The footsteps grew louder, then stopped just outside. "Nothing but rats and dust in these old places," one man called. "Let's head back." "They've probably gone north toward the pass." The footsteps retreated, followed by the sound of horses being mounted and ridden away. Frederick waited a full 10 minutes before relaxing his vigilance. "That was too close," Olivia breathed, her heart still racing. Frederick nodded, holstering his weapon. "We'll wait another hour to be sure they're gone, then make our way back to the cabin. We need to collect our things and move on tonight." The sun had fully set by the time they left the mining camp, picking their way carefully through the darkness. The moon provided just enough light to navigate, but progress was slow on the uneven terrain. They were within a half-mile of the cabin when a voice called out from the shadows. "That's far enough." Olivia froze as a figure emerged from behind a large pine tree, the third rider, who must have stayed behind to watch the cabin. He held a rifle pointed directly at them. "Uncle Thomas will be mighty pleased," the man said, his weathered face twisted in a cruel smile. "Been looking for you two for a week now." Frederick slowly raised his hands. "Your quarrel's not with the lady," he said evenly. "It's with me. I'm the one who broke her out." "Oh, I know exactly who you are, Blackburn," the man replied. "Marshal turned outlaw. There's talk of charges being filed against you for kidnapping." "That's absurd," Olivia protested. "He rescued me." The man's grin widened. "Not how your uncle tells it. Says this man seduced you away with promises, planning to claim your inheritance for himself." Frederick's expression darkened. "You know that's a lie. Don't much care either way," the man shrugged. "Reward's the same." He gestured with the rifle. "Now both of you start walking back toward the cabin, nice and slow." They had no choice but to comply, moving forward with the rifle at their backs. Olivia's mind raced, searching desperately for a way out of their predicament. They had nearly reached the clearing when Frederick stumbled, falling to one knee. As the gunman moved closer to prod him up, Frederick suddenly whirled, knocking the rifle barrel upward. The weapon discharged harmlessly into the night sky as the two men grappled for control. "Run, Olivia," Frederick shouted, struggling with their captor. Instead, Olivia grabbed a fallen branch and swung it with all her might at the gunman's head. The impact wasn't enough to knock him unconscious, but it distracted him long enough for Frederick to land a solid punch that sent the man sprawling. Frederick quickly disarmed him, then used the man's own bandana to bind his hands behind his back. "We need to hurry," he urged, retrieving his hat from where it had fallen during the struggle. "That shot will bring the others back if they are still in the area." They rushed to the cabin, hastily gathering their essential belongings and saddling the horses. Within 15 minutes, they were riding hard away from the homestead, taking a different route than before southwest, toward the higher mountain passes. They rode through the night, stopping only briefly to rest the horses. By dawn, they had put considerable distance between themselves and their pursuers, emerging from the forest onto a high meadow ringed by towering peaks. "Where are we going?" Olivia asked as they paused to water the horses at a mountain stream. "There's a settlement on the other side of these mountains," Frederick explained. "Silver Springs, small enough to be overlooked, big enough to have a telegraph office. My friend in Cheyenne should have sent word there by now." Olivia washed her face in the cold stream, the events of the past night catching up with her. When she straightened, she found Frederick watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You should have run when I told you to," he said quietly, "and leave you." She responded, moving closer to him. "I couldn't do that, Fred." Something broke in his carefully maintained composure. He reached for her, his calloused hand gently cupping her cheek. "I couldn't bear it if anything happened to you because of me." "Nothing will happen to either of us," Olivia said with newfound determination. "We're in this together now." His blue eyes searched hers for a long moment before he slowly lowered his head, giving her time to pull away if she wished. Instead, Olivia lifted her face to his, and their lips met in a kiss that started tentatively but quickly deepened with shared urgency. When they finally parted, breathless, Frederick rested his forehead against hers. I've wanted to do that since the moment I saw you walk out of Mrs. Wilson's bathroom in that borrowed dress. Olivia laughed softly. I've wanted you to do that since you burned down that barn door to rescue me. They reluctantly resumed their journey, but now they rode closer together, their hands occasionally reaching across the space between their horses to touch briefly before parting again. The trail through the mountains was arduous but beautiful, winding through stands of aspen and pine, crossing crystal-clear streams, and occasionally opening onto vistas that stretched for miles. By late afternoon, they had reached the summit of the pass and could see the small settlement of Silver Springs nestled in the valley below. "We'll be there by nightfall," Frederick said, pointing to the distant cluster of buildings. As they began their descent, Olivia felt a curious mixture of relief and apprehension. Their arrival in Silver Springs would mark the beginning of a new phase in their ordeal, one that would involve legal challenges and public scrutiny. "What will happen when we reach town?" she asked. Frederick considered for a moment. "First, we'll find a safe place to stay. Then I'll check for messages from my contact in Cheyenne. If all goes well, he'll have obtained legal documents establishing your independence from your uncle's guardianship. And if all doesn't go well—" His eyes met hers, steady and reassuring. "Then we'll find another way, Olivia. I promise you that." The sun was setting as they rode into Silver Springs, casting long shadows across the single main street. Unlike Wilson's Creek, this town showed signs of prosperity. The buildings were newer, the streets wider, and a small church spire rose above the rooftops at the far end. Frederick led them to a hotel near the center of town, a two-story structure with a freshly painted sign announcing it as the Silver Springs Lodge. He secured separate rooms for them, using different names, then went to check the telegraph office while Olivia settled in. When he returned an hour later, his expression was triumphant. He knocked softly on her door, and when she opened it, he quickly slipped inside, producing a telegram from his pocket. "Good news," he said, his eyes alight with excitement. "My friend came through. He's obtained a court order from a judge in Cheyenne, recognizing your legal independence and freezing your uncle's access to your inheritance until a full hearing can be conducted." Olivia took the telegram with trembling hands, reading the terse but definitive message. "This means we're safe." "It means your uncle no longer has legal authority over you," Frederick clarified. "His accusations against me for kidnapping won't stand without his guardianship. We'll still need to be cautious until the full hearing, but yes, you're free, Olivia." She flung her arms around his neck, overwhelmed with relief and gratitude. Frederick held her tightly, his face buried in her hair. "There's something else," he murmured after a moment. "Something I've been wanting to say since that night by the fire during the storm." Olivia pulled back slightly to look at him, her heart quickening at the expression in his eyes. "I know it's too soon," he continued, his voice low and earnest. "We've known each other barely 2 weeks, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. I'm falling in love with you, Olivia Harrington." Joy bloomed in her chest, bright and overwhelming. "It's not too soon," she whispered, reaching up to trace the line of his jaw. "I fell in love with you the moment you said you'd burn down that barn door to save me." Their second kiss was deeper than the first, filled with promise and newfound certainty. When they finally parted, Frederick rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed as if memorizing the moment. "Stay with me," Olivia whispered. "Not just tonight, but after the hearing, after everything is settled. Stay with me." Frederick's eyes opened, his gaze holding hers. "I'm not going anywhere, Olivia. Wherever you go, whatever you decide to do with your inheritance and your future, I want to be by your side if you'll have me." "Is that a proposal, Frederick Blackburn?" she asked, her tone light but her eyes serious. He smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Let's call it a promise for now. When this is all over, when you're truly free and safe, then I'll ask you properly with a ring and on one knee." Olivia stood on her tiptoes to kiss him again. "I'll hold you to that promise." 2 months later, under a brilliant autumn sky, Olivia stood on the porch of a newly built schoolhouse in Silver Springs. The court hearing had gone in her favor. Her inheritance had been secured, and Uncle Thomas faced charges of his own for false imprisonment. She had used part of her inheritance to establish the school, fulfilling her lifelong dream. The rest she had invested wisely, ensuring financial independence for herself and generations to come. A familiar set of hoofbeats approached, and she turned to see Frederick riding toward the schoolhouse, his chestnut gelding kicking up golden leaves along the path. He dismounted with the easy grace she had come to love, removing his hat as he climbed the steps to join her. "How are the preparations coming along?" he asked, nodding toward the interior of the schoolhouse where desks were being arranged for the first day of classes. "Perfectly," Olivia replied, unable to keep the excitement from her voice. "We open next Monday with 27 students already enrolled." Frederick smiled, pride evident in his eyes. "Schoolmistress Harrington has a nice ring to it." "Actually," Olivia said, a mischievous glint in her eye, "I've been thinking it might be Schoolmistress Blackburn soon. That is, if a certain former marshal ever makes good on his promise." Frederick's expression softened. From his pocket, he produced a small velvet box. "I was waiting for the schoolhouse to be finished," he admitted. "Thought it might be fitting, since education has always been your dream." He lowered himself to one knee right there on the schoolhouse porch, opening the box to reveal a delicate gold ring set with a small but perfect diamond. "Olivia Harrington, will you marry me?" Her eyes filled with happy tears as she nodded. "Yes, Frederick Blackburn. Yes, I will." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Olivia couldn't help but think of that desperate day in the barn when she had thought all hope was lost. How could she have known that the stranger who burned down the door to rescue her would also be the man to open the door to a future brighter than she had ever imagined? Frederick rose to his feet and pulled her into his arms, sealing their engagement with a kiss that promised a lifetime of love and partnership. Behind them, the schoolhouse stood as a testament to dreams fulfilled, and before them stretched a future they would build together one day at a time.